Indigenous leaders are pushing the newly reinstalled Morrison government to establish a voice to Parliament, despite senior coalition figures suggesting it's unlikely to go ahead. One of the country's most influential Aboriginal voices, Noel Pearson, has been rallying support at a community event in Brisbane and is convinced a referendum on the issue could happen soon. Indigenous Affairs reporter Isabella Higgins reports.
It's almost 2 years to the day since a historic gathering of Indigenous leaders met at the foot of Uluru and called for an enshrined voice to Parliament. Since then, the Turnbull government rejected the idea. An almost year-long parliamentary inquiry examined the concept further, and then the Morrison government gave it tentative support. But Noel Pearson believes in less than 3 years, enough work will be done to hold a referendum on the issue.
There's absolutely no question in my mind that we will move forward with the voice, and I'm very confident that we can find a model for the voice, assure as Australians that the voice will be consistent with the Constitution, but it will truly advance the agenda that Indigenous people have been seeking for a very long time.
The Morrison government put aside $7 million in this year's budget to fund another lengthy inquiry that will work with communities to design this enshrined advisory body. There was also $130 million in the budget set aside to fund a future referendum on the issue. But just this week, senior coalition MP Alan Tudge said it wasn't on the government's agenda for this term of Parliament. Despite this, Mr Pearson and other Indigenous leaders speaking at a community event in Brisbane last night were optimistic about the future.
Well, I think the challenge with the Parliament is still obviously formidable and considerable, but I think it's a lot easier than 24 months ago.
The University of Queensland's Bronwyn Frederick says it's now time to convince the public, but is cautious about rushing to a referendum.
I do think there's a groundswell happening. I just can say from communities that I visit.
You made quite a resounding call that this is a fight that needs to move out of politics, that needs to move away from just convincing politicians and convincing everyday people. Is that the greatest challenge?
I'd rather, we go to that referendum with people marching to it with, I'm going to vote yes, this has got to happen and it has to happen, rather than still have a little bit of hesitancy.
Mr Pearson believes there's a better chance of winning over the public under the coalition rather than Labor.
Australians are very conservative about changing the Constitution. Wherever there is change, it's usually led by conservative governments. Prime Minister Morrison eventually led on this amendment. The prospects of bringing the right of Australia, because we need the right, to come on board.
Indigenous leader Noel Pearson ending that report by Isabella Higgins.